Yes, so asking me about how I'm liking COP21. And, it's a complex question because, of course, it happens within this incredibly tragic context of Paris. And the tragedy that's known internationally, of course, the terrorist event, is great, but I think there is another very serious tragedy, which is that the extreme right party, Front National in France, has just become the strongest party in France. And the tragedy is that really the climate events that are very significantly impacting also the political systems around the world and are part of the reason why there are so many refugees are now doing the contrary of helping us to increase our awareness about the environment and are increasing anti-environmental movements such as the extreme right in France and throughout Europe. So there are a lot of tragic and challenging and difficult situations that are happening around COP. But I think it's also very important not to get paralyzed by the tragedy because there are many very positive things happening, and not only in the negotiation space, which we will still see what the result will be, but there are promising possibilities here. And I've been involved for more than 20 years in this process. I've been inside the negotiation room. I've been filing on sentences and briefing delegations, briefing the United Nations leadership and so forth. So I've been inside this process. But for me, really, what's the most exciting thing in these last 3 decades of global meetings has been the global village of hundreds of thousands of people who come together from civil society to meet around this United Nations process. And to me, that's the real meeting in a certain sense. We think it's all about the United Nations, about the negotiations, about the treaties, and the treaties play a very important role. But I think what really has happened over these decades is that a lot of personal friendships and professional partnerships have been established. And for me, in a world in which civil society is increasingly necessary to exercise real democracy, because representative democracy through governments is very limited and is strongly impacted by special interest groups. This balance of civil society is incredibly important, and in a way these big UN events bring together an informal global parliament of representatives of thousands of civil society organizations that represent really billions of people. So in a certain way, the representatives of billions of people are coming together here in a very organic, informal process to talk, to listen, and also to make plans for action. And so I've been fascinated looking back. I was very involved in the culminating United Nations conference Habitat in Istanbul about 20 years ago. And at that time, for example, we introduced together with some friends who were very involved with creating a then totally nascent movement for integrating social and environmental sustainability with business. And we were 6 of us, and we gave I think 3-hour presentation to the General Assembly at that time, and briefed many of the delegations and so forth. But I remember especially this 3 hours with the General Assembly, and representatives from Argentina with A to Zimbabwe with Z, were speaking out in this incredible disbelief. How would it be possible that companies could possibly consider social and environmental and human rights issues, right? And we started out just with hundreds of companies wanting to show that a different economy is possible. And of course, we are still so far away from that. But if you think about what happened in the last 20 years, of how much further along we have come, that there are now many, many companies and many, many people in business who are really trying to integrate. There are now consumers that are demanding a different kind of product that is more responsible. Investors that are demanding investments that, people that give money to banks that want that this money gets invested differently according to social and environmental criteria. So out of these very small initiatives that we were able to start, for example, and bring to this summit 20 years ago, now you can see it has become a global movement. And the same, of course, is true with other movements that have, been launched in the UN process. And it was just wonderful to meet again now with my friends from the environmental community, the human rights community, the social movements, to see how far we have come on certain issues at the same time as there's so many crises, so many difficulties that are stopping us. And I think this time in particular also through, Ellen, your beautiful meeting that you convened a few days ago. I think we are now integrating another aspect that is very dear to my heart, which is understanding that we will not resolve the big problems of the world if we don't learn to collaborate effectively, especially also amongst the social movements, the change movements, but more generally around the world. And that collaborating is not only a good intention, it is also a very skillful action. It's a maturation into the ability to deal with difference, also difference we don't like. As we know, it's very fashionable now to be for diversity, right? But we know also when people have really a different opinion, it's difficulty to really open to that, to really listen, to really see how can we co-create, even though we come from very different cultures, different sectors, different types of organization, different interests. How can we nevertheless find a creative movement into a solution that isn't just a lowest common denominator compromise, but really a evolutionary step into the future? And so I feel like in this meeting we had with you, but also in many other conversations that I'm having here and concrete projects that are developing, there is now more of a consciousness that we have to integrate this interpersonal and individual development work into our potential to be real human beings, to be not just in a human body, but to have our humanity developed so that we can respect diversity, so that we can co-create, so that we can overcome what separates us as human beings, to really find solutions for the great challenges of our time. So that for me is really now much more possible to talk about in the context than it was some decades ago. And as you know, that's very much my work to work with leaders around the world and organizations and social movements around the world, of integrating in a way this societal development with the human development. And I think for me one of the biggest hopes is that there are now millions and millions of people and their representatives here in this global village who understand that we will resolve our problems better if we also work on our humanity. And so I feel, as always, hopeful, because I've observed for more than three decades now the development of social movements around the world, and with all the difficulties that we can witness, if we really think about it, you know, how the women's movement has progressed, the environmental movement, the human rights movement, and the other movements, we can observe that there is actually also a lot of progress. So I think it's very important to see the crisis, take from it a sense of urgency, a sense of responsibility, but not to be discouraged, and to move forward in this incredible, promising time of using the inspiration of challenge and move towards opportunity.